today. We're going to hear from Working Group 1 and 2 on their final preliminary reports. And at 10:30, we're going to hear from the General Counsel's office. She has further guidance on communications within and among the members of the committee, things that we may not have been aware of before. And then we'll talk about next steps. And we would like some input on the outline that two outlines, I guess, have been submitted. And if you have thoughts on those, we'd be interested in taking your views on that today. So why don't we call the roll, see who's here.
Ahmad Ansari. Brent Candelore. I believe you're on the phone. Don't have Brent. John Card. Matt Chabood, who's filling in for Matt Clark from Amazon. Bob Klein.
Yeah.
Adam Goldberg.
Hello.
Mark Hess. Brad Love. I don't see Brad. Okay. Oh, he would be right there. Ken Lowe. John McCoskey.
Here.
Bruce McClelland.
Good morning.
Milo Medine. I believe Milo's on the phone.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Bright and early. John Godfrey, who is alternate for Samsung. Jay Rolls. Where were you, Jay? Sima Sethumadhavan. I believe you're on the phone.
Yes, I'm on the phone. Good morning.
Good morning. Brent Smith. Joe Weber.
Here.
And Robin Wilson, I believe you're on the phone.
Yep, I'm here, thank you.
Perfect. Good morning.
Okay, who's going to give the Working Group 1 report?
This is Jay Rolls. So, as a reminder, the Working Group 1 members were Matt Clark from Amazon, Milo Medine from Google, Adam Goldberg from Public Knowledge, John Mikowski from MPAA, Brent Smith from Evolution Digital, Brad Love from Halpage, John Card from Dish, Robin Wilson from Nagra, and myself, Jay Rolls from Charter Communications. So we took advantage of the extra time that we were given to dive more into some of the meat of the topics that we talked about last time. So our report is fairly succinct, so I'm going to read from parts of this, fill in where appropriate, take questions, ask other members of my working group to chime in where they see fit. I doubt this will take an hour. I know you have an hour on the schedule. I don't think it will take nearly an hour. So, but we welcome questions on the material that we're going to present here. So, we had done a lot of preliminary work. We gave a bit of a preliminary readout last time. So this final report that we circulated on Sunday night is a more formal summary of our activities, and also it captures the additional dialogue and a couple of the conclusions that we reached beyond sort of the initial feedback we provided in March. The first sort of report, which we titled Talking Points, is part of this as an appendix. And just as a reminder, what we were chartered to do was identify commercial requirements of content owners, MVPDs, multi-channel video programming distributors, which you may hear me refer to as operators, just to save my breath, consumer electronics companies, systems equipment manufacturers, and consumers. We were to consider the risk, threats, including but not limited to content piracy, brand protection, consumer privacy, device cloning, and device spoofing. We split our requirements, as you may remember, into 5 primary areas: operators, CE/device manufacturers, consumer, content providers, and security. Since we discussed the talking point summary last time, we've compiled quite a list of specific requirements consisting of about 200 different items. That's also an appendix in the report here. So that list served as a tool for our group participants to, express their proposed requirements based on various areas of expertise and study of the group members. I'll come back to the list in a second. So the list is, our best run at it. I wouldn't say it's completely 100% exhaustively complete, but it's a pretty comprehensive list. And after we compiled the list, we looked at we looked at this long list and we said we need to boil this down somehow. So we started to focus in on this notion of tenets and sort of major important themes. There's some smaller items that are in the list that are just not worth debating. They're more minor. So we tried to so we came up with that label tenets to try and focus our discussion and get to sort of some of the root issues that we thought were important. And we also looked at major areas of alignment and non-alignment, or places where the language may conflict. And so those tenets helped us provide some focus, and I'm going to talk about those today. Let's see here. So, sort of overarching, I'm going to read from this first paragraph. Generally, our working group recognized that programming and content has value, and mechanisms need to be put in place to protect intellectual property rights in such content. And at a fundamental level, this involves encryption and the use of a secure system that can identify, authenticate, and protect content from all the points that have access to the system. So we talked about protection of the content and protection of the security system itself as well. We actually did not have, we have a kind of a nice list of tenets here, but we did not have enough time, we felt, to get to all the potential tenets that may rise out of this list of requirements. So I'm going to talk about the main ones that we focused on today. So there are four. They are user interface, guide data, technology licensing, and, well, one is sort of not a tenet, but it was a technological difference that I'll highlight. So the topic that received the most discussion was the user interface, so I'll lead with that one. This is the layer that presents the service to the customer. Although more comprehensive than just a user interface, UI or user interface was the term that we kind of used as a abbreviation. Should an operator's UI be allowed to exist as the only possible method through which a operator's customer consumes the operator's service? Or should competitive devices have access to, or continue in the case of cable MSOs, a operator's services, for instance, licensed linear programming, enable those services to be presented by a retail device with its own UI? This topic received fervent debate in the group. Operators state that they have come a long way from the days of simply broadcasting video channels and placing them on a list or a grid on a TV guide. Operators also assert that a profusion of additional features have been added to their offerings, with most being incorporated into their UI. And a couple examples were start over, look back, recent tuning history, voice control, HD auto tune, bill pay, things like that. Other participants, such as consumer advocates, retail manufacturers, and one operator, asserted that a fundamental feature of a competitive navigation device is that it has the option to present its own unique UI to access the operator's services. Without the ability to present a unique UI, such parties assert retail devices would be denied some ability to innovate and present the consumer with a differentiated and competitive alternative to an operator-supplied device. as a counterpoint to this argument, the operators noted that they are simply trying to honor their programming agreements. So that was on the topic of UI. Next topic was tenant was guide data. This also received a lot of discussion and deliberation, and this relates to intellectual property rights in guide data. So some group members advocated that operators should be required to provide retail devices with guide data or program information beyond what we provide today. And I think what we provide today is just channel number and channel ID. So to go beyond that, for instance, program title, program detail, a lot of the detailed information about program data. The operators pointed out that some or much of this data is provided under commercial terms that only allow sort of a business-to-consumer distribution, not a business-to-business distribution type arrangement. Consumer advocates and retail device manufacturers pointed out that certain guide data, such as VOD, is not subject to such constraints and is only available from the operators. The third tenet, technology licensing. CE manufacturers assured that technology required by the operator's architecture to implement their conditional access solution needs to be available through particular licensing terms. FRAND is a common term that we use, and the FRAND stands for fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, to enable a competitive retail market. Some operators have made it clear that many such technologies are owned and controlled by third parties, not by the operator, with terms not under control of the operator. Consumer advocates and retail manufacturers have made clear that they believe the SEC has the authority to require such licensing, and in the footnote in the report, there's actually a citing of a regulation to back up that point. So those were some of the tenets. Lastly, there was a technological difference that I think has come up at our general DSTAC full committee meetings, not in detail, but given that the statutory requirement calls for a, quote, uniform and technology and platform neutral, close quote, system, some of us thought that this presents kind of a paradox in that either, and the paradox is as it relates to DBS. DBS is a one-way system. So either two separate systems are described, bifurcated into one- and two-way systems, which then sort of no longer honors the uniform requirement, or the system is treated as a single system, which would seem to dictate a one-way system. So other members felt that that this could still be met, that you could still solve this problem, does not represent a paradox, but we didn't get far enough to get into details to talk about how that might be solved. But they felt that that was not an insurmountable issue. So I thought it might be worth just reading, when you think of this list of 200 requirements, you're like, okay, what's in those requirements? I thought I'd just read, there was about 6 of us that contributed, so I thought I'd read 6 of those requirements just to give people who might be on the phone or who might be watching this, don't have the document in front of them, a little flavor of what that is. So I picked one from each of the areas. For instance, on security, there's one that says the scrambling or encryption algorithm used for the content should conform to open and fully disclosed industry standards such as AES 128 and defined in such a way, i.e. block size or key frequency, that allows common encryption across both conditional access systems and digital rights management systems. That's one. I kind of touched on this other one. All required technology must be available under FRAND licenses, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. Third one here, the system must require and support basic authentication practices, including subscriber validation, device authentication, subscriber service and entitlement, and must include geolocation to support territorial and regionally restricted content distribution. The next one, the system must allow unaffiliated third-party manufacturers to build navigation devices, and the system must allow those devices to be sold directly to consumers through unaffiliated and unconstrained retail channels. And then the last two, I'm just trying to give people a little flavor here of what these requirements sound like. The system must support pushed or pre-cached VOD content delivered by DBS. That's kind of a unique thing to DBS. And then lastly, the system must preserve and present the branded service that represents an operator's offering, including but not limited to the programming, integrated data, interactive features, a guide, and software that enforces content provider requirements. So a little taste of the requirements.
Are those prioritized in any way?
No, unfortunately, they're not prioritized. They are segmented into topics, so security, device, consumer, things like that. So that's the extent of the readout. I want to ask any of the other group members if they want to add anything or if I left anything out. And if not, we'd love to hear from the other committee members that are not part of our working group, see if you have any questions.
Yeah, Robin here, just to add to, I think that was Cheryl's question on prioritization. I mean, yes, they're not prioritized, but I think worse than that, I don't mean to be negative in that sense, but they're overlapping in some ways. They do need a good cleanup. In other words, when I did my security ones, I took a higher level description of and a few. I think I only did 15 or so. However, I see some of the other use cases are kind of sliced and diced into little corner cases, which is perfectly appropriate, but they are, in my opinion, subsets of what I attempted to capture as a one overreaching use case or description. So there's quite a bit of cleanup to be done, I would say.
And maybe just to add to that, we started looking for areas of alignment and conflict in the requirements. We were actually started referencing by number, but with 200 of them, it got pretty complex pretty fast. So, and I would not want to drag this group through that today. But we do have a little bit of results of that work too. I think Adam was going to say something as well.
One thing, if I can, I remember early on you used must and should, and I think there are a few shoulds in here. Can you explain the difference between
those? And this is, I think, sort of common practice in standards bodies and things like that. So I actually did not put those terms in there. You've seen them in some of the documents, but I didn't actually put them into this document here. But there is a distinction between must and actually I don't remember the list. Do you remember, Adam, what I know must is one, but
Excuse me?
Maybe if you take John's microphone.
Oh, that's John's?
Oh, no.
Let's see. Is John's? Oh, John's is better. Okay. So there's sort of two things here I think we're getting mixed up. One is did we write shall or did we write must? And there's some arguably subtle differences between them. But your question was, some places there's must and some places there's should, and the difference is in one case it would be a normative requirement, thou shalt, and in the other is it's a recommendation of a good way to do something, should, right? Sort of. And in standards land, we sort of run the spectrum between shall, should, may, need not, should not, shall not, and I don't think we have all of those used in here. But at any rate, the difference between must and shall and should is one's a requirement, one's a recommendation.
I think I would like to start kind of marching through the functional requirements in a very high-level way to begin to conceptualize the long-term goal of realizing that we have to transition at some point soon from looking at the requirements of these systems as a whole to focusing on the requirements of what the eventual output of DStack has to look like. So as a networking person, I always lurch back to some notion of kind of a layer diagram. Let me march back through some of the items that you talked about and try to get your reactions as to conceptually how we should think about it from that very high level. So certainly we have the video stream or video streams as a major information flow. Should I think of the guide data as being an ancillary data flow, right? Another data channel in at least some virtual sense?
Go ahead, John.
Honey,
You're
I
on.
think this. Okay. No. There's absolutely ancillary data, lists of stars and dates that a movie might be made in guide data. But there's a necessary part of the guide data that I think, at least from the DBS perspective, which is the specific, say, name of the channel. How do you know that you're watching HBO's East Coast feed, West Coast feed, their signature feed, HBO Latino, etc.? The various designations of what channel you're looking at. If you are familiar with the ATSC broadcast system, there's a TSID, which can tell you identify which specific broadcast station you're looking at. There is no such thing for the vast majority of cable, quote, cable channels carried. So looking at from one system to another, you may be looking at a name of HBO that is identifiable to a human being as HBO West or East, but is not the same on a Charter cable system and on the Dish broadcast DBS system. They are not going to be identical. So there is a part of guide data that's going to be required in order to find the actual stream that a customer really wants to see, or that is authorized to see as well. So there's a CAS function in there. In the case of DBS, we're going to be a little bit weird because there's another part of, for us, guide and CAS interactions, which has to deal with locals and where we are allowed to provide local broadcast stations. So for us, that would be ancillary information. It is partly a CAS function and it is partly a guide data function. There's also some other information which you would call ancillary, but if a customer didn't have it, they would be trying to find their local broadcast stations up in the 6,000 channel number instead of local 5, for example.
So in some sense, do you think of it more as signaling that is then in some cases controlling the video channel, the video stream?
Let me try. The collection of data we call guide data is a lot more than you might think at first glance. There's stuff like John was saying about identifying HBOs on channel 300. There's stuff that says, well, it's this particular movie on at this time. Then there's other stuff like this is only available if you're in this area, or this content is unavailable to you. But if you put up this message and someone to purchase it, there's stuff like alternate numbers where I guess John's system transmits the content actually on channel 6000, but it's displayed in your guide as channel 5, and sort of runs the gamut between channel name or some identification, program name or some identification, details about that program, rating, whether it has captions or not, what actors are in it, what the description of the program is, you might stop there on thinking about guide data, but really I think when we talk about guide data, a lot of times what we mean is data about the programming writ large more than just data that goes in a guide. So in a lot of cases, the things that are in guide data, aren't something that's protected by some sort of contract with a guide data provider like Rovio or Tribune. In a lot of cases, it is maybe things like program descriptions, and in a lot of cases, it's just factual information like this is HBO. So it runs the gamut.
Yeah. So
let me
what I want to
clarify
get
that.
at here.
Your point goes right to the root of some of the debate that we had, which is a lot of the operators, advocate for an app approach to this. All that's taken care of inside of an operator's app that is presented. So it's all done. In regards to where it's not an app that presents that, then I don't think there is a pro, because I don't think that's part of what's provided. That is not something we go out on a retail basis and buy that data and provide that in our own environment. Others can do the same, but we are not, as I was quoted in the report, we're not licensed to provide that to third parties. We're licensed to provide that to consumers.
Well,
so leaving the licensing terms aside for the moment, right? What I'm hearing is that guide data and I think UI kind of have a hybrid nature to them, right? So part of what I'm hearing is that there's additional information it's providing apart from the video stream itself. That guide data and I think UI kind of have a hybrid nature to them, right? So part of what I'm hearing is that there's additional information it's providing apart from the video stream itself. So in a networking sense, I would think of that as another connection, right? Another flow. The other thing I'm hearing is sometimes it's being used to control the video stream. In a classic networking sense, that's signaling, right? That's
I don't
control channel. It's a signaling channel.
But it's. I don't think
is
it's.
there consensus that it has these? That both UI and guide data have these dual roles, or is there a different way?
This is what I was trying to get at. Things about what's on now is got some licensing discussion behind it, and a competitive device needs to be able to figure out what's on now somehow. We've heard from some providers that they want to provide it to third-party devices, and from others that they either don't want to or can't. The signaling aspects of it is, sort of how to find it, how to tune to it, what it looks like, whether it's got, what its VCHIP rating is so that it can be blocked. I think a lot of that stuff is real easy once you figure out the first part.
If I may, this is Joe Weber at TiVo. Back to one of your original comments, is the layer cake, I think is the word you used, and to correct something that John had said. If you do look at it as a layer cake, which is how both the SCTE and DVB SI specs do look at it, there are necessary components in terms of being able to tune or access to the signals. You said, where is HBO in terms of the channel map and tuning? And those are actually well-defined specifications that are common across cable and I believe in somewhat satellite, at least in terms of European standards. And when we go back to the cable card, we identified this is the common way to do that, and it's still in place today. So I think we're hearing that too, is there's at the base levels is a very common sort of signal way to do that. It's well defined. And even when you look at the tables as defined within DVB or SCTE, you then hierarchy add things in terms of EITs, which is event information. Okay, I know where to tune HBO, what's on HBO. And then event information that goes in the future, what's on HBO tomorrow. And then extended event information, what actors are on that event that is tomorrow. So I like, as you said, the term, the hierarchy in terms of layer cake, and there's standards and protocols that are well defined because they're necessary for access to the signal, independent of application, independent of network. And then some of the complexity gets when you go beyond that, when you add extra layers to to the layer cake. So just want to clarify that I think at the lowest levels there is common. All right, John's going to tell us perhaps that theirs is a little bit different, but it's pretty straightforward to map to a common protocol.
Yes, indeed, Joe. 20 years ago, the dish broadcast system was very straightforward and was based on the DVB standards. And then we began carrying local channels, and we had customers wondering why they had to tune to channel 6000 for local 5. So it is absolutely true that you can find some of the DVB structures in the guide data, which is broadcast on dish, but being clever engineers, we used those tables where we thought they would be best used, and we added information where we thought we could most efficiently do it. So we have not, as Dish, gone back to DVB and said, hey, DVB, if you ever want to describe a system that has to broadcast local channels into 210 different markets, here's exactly how you do it, from 11 different satellites and half a dozen different orbital locations, and reusing the same channel number 4 times across the broadcast system. We haven't bothered to go back to DVB because, as far as we know, we are the only folks on the planet who do that and who need to do that. If some other DVB-based system were to launch in the U.S., I suppose it would make some sense to try and standardize that. But shame on us, we are not following standards. We have diverged more and more over the years. Doesn't mean it can't be understood. Obviously, we build set-top boxes. We, being EchoStar, build set-top boxes that run on the dish system. But the layering of what is CAS, what is conditional access. If conditional access is, do I have the right to watch that video stream? Some of that information is absolutely carried in the DVB CAS structures. Other parts of that information are carried elsewhere in tables that don't exist in the DVB standards, in particular for locals.
So
don't exist as we use them. We've worked them.
If I think of this as being partly signaling and partly additional information, recognizing, so again, taking licensing aside for the moment, recognizing the disagreements in the working group as to what the service is.
I'm sorry, we can't hear folks who are talking unless they talk into the mic, those of us on the phone.
So if one wanted interoperability, on the signaling side, is that in a standard networking sense that needs to be information about the signaling protocol? And on the additional information side, is it essentially some description of what additional information is provided? Right. I don't want to wander too far into the architecture because I know that's the next working group, but to set those issues up for that discussion, can I think of it at a general architectural level as being that if one wanted interoperability, then essentially we're talking about some set of signaling protocols and some description of additional information. I know that's a very generic way of doing it, but I'm trying to describe it in a way that's going to work across the different architectures that you all represent.
Yeah, I think of it as a reference ID. So that, if you had program name, programmer channel number, and then programmer ID. Hopefully an ID in a unique enough way that is, it is unique, then you can cross-reference it if you want to overlay your own information on top of that. That provides all the plethora of detail that may be behind that, or what's on that channel at that time.
So I think the answer is yes to exactly what you said. There's some necessary information that can be standardized, and typically is. And then there's maybe additional information that we get into some of the other debate. But again, I point to like the SET and DVB specs. They intentionally made some of this information in the clear, unscrambled, because they knew it was necessary for navigation. So things like the SI tables or some of the PSIP that was discussed, because that is just basic information that is necessary to know where to tune to watch programming. And then when you get beyond that, some of that might be scrambled or generated out of band in a proprietary manner because you said that's additional information, not necessarily necessary to simply watch programming.
Any other comments, discussion?
I have some questions. This is Simacha Madhavan on the phone. I have some questions on the requirements themselves. Basically, these are clarifications on some definitions. So B71, requirement B71 states that the system must support monitoring live operations. What is a live operation?
That's, I think that was John's contribution. So B71?
Yeah.
Sure. So this requirement relates to, just a moment, let me find, these were cross-indexed in another document.
Oh, is it not the same B71?
It is, no, it is B71. I can find the actual.
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak and tell you it's coming from a different place.
Can you read B71 while he's looking that up?
The system must support monitoring live operations.
Yeah, so this relates to running, as the system is live, as you're actually broadcasting content. There's different operational mechanisms supported by the CAS that allows a content owner and a service provider to jointly manage the secure distribution of content. And that comes in the agreements signed between the content providers and the operators, the MVPDs. One of those requirements is to know, is your security still good? How good has it been hacked? So there's the requirement is specifically related around the idea of getting back to a content owner to let them know, yeah, on our live system we're still good, or it looks like we've leaked some content here, or this event is no longer protected, or some other feature of the CAS system. In the worst case, you end up deciding that, well, because you've found in the field enough copies of the content that's flowed through your system, the CAS is broken, needs to be renewed or replaced. So the live operations is the actual operations of the CAS system, and knowing, having the right metrics coming through the system, possibly all the way from the end devices, to know that things are still secure, or some instantiation of the CAS, some downloaded version of it, has been hacked or would need to be replaced. Does that make sense?
Yes. I also have questions on a few more definitions in Section B. So Section B talks about a native app and also talks about a content owner's app. This is in requirements B9 and B11. Sometimes it says let me just pull that up. B9. It says that the system must support start over, look back content delivered by broadband to authenticated in-home devices via native app and the HTML website, and native and HTML5 are within parentheses. And then later in B11, it talks about the system must support authenticated linear and or on-demand streaming and or download using content owner's app and or website. So it seems like there are two notions of an app, a native app, a content owner's app, and the native is within parentheses. So I was just wondering if you could clarify what exactly you mean by the native app and what's a content owner's app.
Sure. So one example there would be if you are an HBO subscriber on various service providers, you can go through the HBO website and watch HBO as it's broadcast. You can also get access to the HBO programming through the application that might be running on your tablet if you're a Dish customer. So the native app would be, for example, the Dish Anywhere app loaded on your iOS device or your Android device. The content owner's app then would be, say, the web interface that HBO provides. I think there are other examples. For example, CBS recently has started providing a lot of content through their own interfaces, and it may be that some content owners are going to have their own application that they would prefer you to run, or that could run on your tablet in a way similar to applications coming from the operator. So the idea here is we need to be able to support these kinds of features however the customer decides to get to the content. In one case, the operation's entirely within the domain of the MVPD. In the other case, the content owner actually is providing a good part of that navigation, so whatever they're doing has to be at least cognizant of the CAS enough to support these kinds of features.
So, can I add? This is Adam Goldberg. I think that as we described, a lot of these, there's a lot of requirements in this list, and it hasn't been scrubbed too much. There are a number of requirements, and I think these are among them, that depending on what the eventual system decided on is, or the approach taken, that some requirements, maybe like these two, take absolutely zero work for the system chosen or described to support these sorts of things. Yeah. On the other hand, it depends on the choices made, because there might be a lot of detail behind this, but it might also amount to it just works.
Yeah, that's correct, Adam. I do think you're correct. I think if we are foolish in our choices, we could break these requirements. But if we're only a little careful, these are probably not going to be a problem. Like, as you say, zero work to do it the right way.
This is Joe from TiVo. I just wanted to further Adam's comments. I mean, having seen this list for the first time only recently, I really would like to say they seem much less requirements than a laundry wish list. And I think scrubbing is beyond is a generous term for it. There are quite a few items in here that we'll see, and I'm not sure how we resolve, but go much beyond enabling competitive navigation device, and in fact use words like must that patently are ridiculous in terms of enabling a third-party device. Just throwing out one of them, that if a consumer buys a retail DVR and they've paid for a hard drive, and then there's a must requirement that they must give up some of that space to the operator for their advertising.
Joe,
and again, that seems very anti-consumer in terms of that requirement.
That may be a poorly written requirement, because that's not the actual requirement. Can you name that one? Because I think there's absolutely misunderstanding. Thanks for speaking up about that. That's not what we meant.
Is it like B1, B2? I mean,
B100 somewhere.
So there's actually a document.
B82, as you mentioned, is the one that says recording space for dynamic ad insertion. There's earlier ones that the consumer must be disabled from fast forwarding. Again, something that a consumer retail DVR has always had the ability to do. In short, I don't think we need to debate any of these. I just wanted to point out that this laundry wish list does not mean requirements that must be applied to the solution.
So, 2 points. The CAS system that we currently use on Dish and that DirecTV currently uses do support these requirements. The second is these actually are extracted from a document which I think has been submitted called the requirements of content owners on DBS providers. What I did in creating that document in cooperation with Steve Dulac of DirecTV is that is a 9-page or so document. It discusses the current status of the agreements that exist between DBS operators and content providers. If the system that we all end up designing is the system that I need to use on the Dish Network system, apart from third-party devices, then all of these requirements between Dish and content providers, or between DirecTV and content providers, are still my requirements. And if the system we are designing is one that I must use for my broadcast, which I understand is the case, for example, for cable card with the Common Reliance, that cable operators are required to use that system, then all of these requirements are here because I care about them. You are absolutely correct that many of these requirements fall away if we're talking about the provisioning of a third-party retail device downstream of some other CAS system. So when the language here that says these things must be supported, this was written from the idea that the CAS system that I have to use because of the agreements that I have signed must support these. I don't know if that's the mission of the downloadable security system we're designing here. If it's not, then, as Adam said before, many of these requirements just evaporate. And this actually did come up in the Workgroup 1 meeting. Many of these requirements are specific to the DBS broadcast side.
It's also, also, Joe, I know you weren't as deeply involved in this as the folks on Working Group 1, but the Working Group 1 report describes this appendix as the participants' proposed requirements. So, I don't think anyone believes that every one of these things in this huge list is really a requirement on the eventual system, but rather is proposed to be a requirement.
Yep. Thank you for the clarification.
If I may, I have just a couple of more clarifications on the requirements. I know these are not binding, but I'd still like to get some clarifications on it. M8 and M12, these talk about providers' obligation to protect personally identifiable information. It seems that under some circumstances it might be hard to satisfy both requirements 8 and 12 in section M. 8 states that the system should support service providers' obligation to protect all personally identifiable information of the customers, including subscriber and viewing habits. And M12 says that the system must support the service provider's audit path for tracking of advertising and viewership. And depending on the population size, it seems like supporting one might lead to compromise of another.
This is Jay Roll speaking. The distinction there is in M12, you're talking about identifying something like devices, IDs, equipment, subscriber equipment, whereas M8 is actual PII, actual personally identifiable information. That's the distinction between the two.
But M12 says that it's for tracking of advertising and viewership. So the goal seems to be, viewership and advertising, which is tied to a human sentient entity, right? It's not related to a device ID.
But the advertising and viewership is about successful delivery to equipment. So you can definitely abstract that from personally identifiable information.
Okay. And just going back to B84, it says the system must support blind ad sales, and it says blind within quotes. I don't know what exactly that means.
Just a second, I will tell you. I believe I got it, but I want to read it in context. I've also the document that this context was pulled from. I'll send to John Kiefer and Brendan. I think sending that on to Workgroup 2 members will help them a lot in understanding at least the DBS requirements. So in the advertising provisioning systems, usually a person who is buying advertising space wants to be treated independent of the content that is being played. There are some definite exceptions, and there are some FCC regulations about advertising in children's programming, et cetera, that have to be honored. But by and large, an advertiser would prefer to be thrown into kind of a random blind set and show up whenever an avail shows up without consideration of the channel, the program, etc. Typically, the rates would be different for someone to want to have an ad sold during the Super Bowl than during some arbitrary programming break on, say, The Price is Right. So the idea here is that the system, if it has anything to do with advertisements and is being used in any way in that part of the infrastructure, it needs to support this idea that ads can come in and be arbitrarily assigned at any particular time. Again, I suspect this may be another requirement that we decide, yep, we're not talking about that part. This CAS or this downloadable security system is not intended to support or to touch on advertising, in which case this requirement becomes still a requirement for the DBS operators, but not a requirement for the downloadable security system. Is that clearer?
Yep, thank you.
Sure.
This is Milo.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I think one of the things that would be helpful for the full committee to keep in mind is we discussed this in the working group, but if you relax certain requirements, for example, if we assume that third-party devices all have internet connectivity, a number of simplifications can happen with all of these mechanisms, right? For example, you may not have to go reserve space or be able to, forward push VOD content to a hard drive when you can just stream it. The ability to get guide data from other sources, as opposed to the operator, becomes much easier, right? That is, guide data for non-VOD content. So I think there are part of the reason why some of the committee members, I think, don't think these requirements are necessarily as onerous as if we make some simplifying assumptions, a lot of the complexity here can be resolved relatively easily. The question is going to be whether or not we want to make that call, that that third-party devices have access to such connectivity, because there's a lot of things that enables. I do also think that, as an operator, our view is we're in the video transport business. Our goal is to take content from the programmers and give it to the users who are paying for access to that content. The metadata are things that are important for the consumer to be able to navigate properly, and programmers want accurate guide data to be presented to the users. So if there are contractual issues that we have to work through, and granted, there's a lot of data you can get, program data that you can get from the web in various ways, I think these things can all be navigated. But there are some assumptions about whether or not the devices are internet connected and other things that are really important.
Okay, does that finish our discussion? Why don't we take 10 minutes?
Shel, I have one very quick comment to make, a clarification, if I may. So it seems that the differences in how advertising is delivered to the consumers. There's targeted advertising and there's broadcast advertising. On the web, targeted advertising is the norm. And there is nothing specifically that bars you from advertising in a targeted manner. Are there regulations, cable regulations or requirements that prevent targeted advertising?
Are there regulations,
or requirements
targeted advertising?
that prevent targeted advertising?
Children's toys.
Oh.
There are some, for example, not, and they apply actually to broadcasters as well, not being able to, during children's programming, simply advertise the toys that are related to the programming that's there. I don't know the FCC rules by heart that those kinds of requirements come from. But by and large, targeted advertising, other than that kind of a restriction by content for children, there aren't any rules today. There are some opt-in, opt-out requirements in some localities that may tend to apply to targeted advertising as well. But at this point, the field is still pretty new for most broadcast systems. There's also there's also requirements on maintaining the confidentiality of personal information, personal identifying information, so that cable and satellite are both bound by requirements not to tell a third-party advertiser, hey, I showed your ad to John Smith. I can say, I showed your ad to a 42-year-old gentleman with the following characteristics: income, ethnicity, kind of car they drive, etc. But I can't say John Smith of 123 Main Street just saw your ad to a third-party advertiser. That requirement is in place, and I think is, at least Dish interprets it as coming from the Cable Act. I suspect others interpret that the same way. So yes, there is a control of privacy concern related to targeting advertising as well.
Okay, lesson learned. I won't promise I'm giving you time back next time. So.
I was going to say, you were the one who said this was going to be 15 minutes, right?
It was brief.
Of course.
Yeah, Jay made mention of sort of the discussion of an app as a mechanism for delivery, and I think the B9 or Z9, depending on what sheet you have, I think, and 11 both indicate a sort of an app as a possible mechanism. Walking it back from a sort of customer-focused perspective, which is typically how we operate in our organization, when we sort of look at navigation and customer accommodation and customer choice, we really view it as sort of fundamentally necessary for unifying navigation to have not just apps which serve as walled gardens, but to have formally protocols for navigation. Because if we don't have that, I think it would serve to be very restrictive of the navigation mechanisms and possible innovations in that space for customers.
The heart of the issue. Are we really, really done? Okay. Why don't we take 10 minutes while we get the attorney from the GC's office? Oh, she's here. We don't have to get her. Why don't we do that, and then we can take a break. You'll take, 5, 10, 15 minutes?
5 minutes. 4 minutes. Oops. I'm not Bill Lake.
Yeah, should we introduce you? This is Paula Silberthal. I think everyone remembers her from the first meeting. But
this is going to be quick. I'm here because a number of questions have come up from you folks or from my own staff here about records and also about the sharing of communications and the flow of communications. And I've also talked on some of these issues with the Secretariat at GSA, which is assigned under the Federal Advisory Committee Act to provide administrative guidelines and controls when we have questions we are not quite certain of. So hopefully what I'm giving you is the proper information. A question arose as to, and it's important as you move along and we review your recommendations, as to what constitutes something that's part of the record and how you guys or members of the public can get things entered into the record. And there's a sort of simple guiding principle here. As much as we love Cheryl, don't send the information you want directly to Cheryl. It goes through one of the designated federal officers, which in this case would be Brendan or Allison? Nancy. Sorry. Yeah, Brendan or Nancy. So if you have, and there are sort of two rules. One is for working groups, one is separately. Now I'm talking about the full group. You have some great new piece of information. You have an article that you would actually like to be shared amongst all of you. That article should be sent to Brendan or Nancy with a request that it be then distributed by Brendan or Nancy to everyone on the committee. So Okay, so principal, go through your DFO on that. Don't just send it off to each other. The reason for that is that you should not be having anything that looks like a deliberative process or communications among a quorum or among lots of other, among all of you, just by sending emails to each other, because that can inadvertently turn into a meeting. It's automatically a meeting if you send something saying, here's how I feel about X that we just discussed at the meeting. If you send that to all members of the group or to a quorum of a group, or if you send it out one thing today, one thing tomorrow, and it adds up to a quorum, that becomes a meeting. And one thing about VACA is that everything's supposed to be deliberated at a full meeting with notice to the public, etc. That's not our decision. That's Congress's decision. They wanted this to be a FACA. They wanted everything to be as open as possible. So if you have things you want to say and that you want other people to share or read, send it through the DFO, and then we avoid that problem. Now, if it's a working group thing, so it's automatically less than a quorum, and you're just trying to share information and you're gathering information and you're trying to communicate with each other, that's fine, as long as it's just, the communication's just limited to all the folks on the working group. So the notion would be working groups, they're allowed to meet in private. You want to expedite communications, that's cool, do it in whatever way you want. But again, you should really keep the DFOs on those communications. So they're sort of your focal point, your trigger point here.
And can I be on those communications too?
Not if it goes over a quorum.
Sorry, I don't know that made it onto the.
I'm sorry,
not if thing to get onto the record here.
Not if it goes over a quorum.
Okay, what does that mean? Quorum for the whole committee or a quorum?
Quorum for the whole committee.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we're just trying to keep it down to less than a majority. That's what I am told. So the other thing is, if it's just a process request. So anyhow, anything substantive you send, and you send to Nancy and Brendan, and I mean, you can CC Cheryl if you want. That's cool, but just make sure it gets to Nancy and Brendan. And if you definitely want it to go into the record, by the way, then you should, make that plain to them. You want it distributed to other people. Just say, please send this out to the group, and, we automatically, if it's substantive, Brendan and Nancy will make it part of the record and put it on the website or in eDocs or whatever the method is, that they're using. If it's just, sort of a process thing, like, can we move the meeting, 5 of us can't attend on such and such a day, you should still go through Brendan and Nancy, but since it's more process or procedural, that probably won't, be posted. They would just go into action mode. Let's see. I think that really covers what I was concerned about. John? Yeah.
So I have got a specific use case for you. So in preparing the outline that I sent off through, I sent it unfortunately to everybody, including Brendan, and it should be part of the record. It was sent back out, and along with Adam's outline. In preparing that, I talked to more than a quorum of the members to get their feedback on, hey, we need to put, the FCC's asked for an outline, here's my ideas, what's your ideas, and so forth. Where did I break? Or did I break the process?
That's not ideal.
Okay.
but it's done.
So what should I have done if I want to talk to the 10th member of the committee about their opinion on this requested outline?
Well, in theory, that should have been either keep it under a quorum, or in theory, it should be done at the full meeting.
Okay.
Even if those are one-on-one discussions?
Well, it's sort of deliberative. I mean, and on that stuff, you could argue in your defense. It's a process thing because you're trying to come up with an outline for various
for the final report, which was requested of us by
various topics. But for example, if you had a report that was circulating and you're trying to come up with the final report, that's something in which I might get more advice from GSA, but in which the ideal thing would be, Brendan would circulate or Nancy would circulate the report, and then you could provide, I guess, edits back or comments back through them. But ideally, it's something that should be done, especially if it's commenting on a preliminary report, something that should be done at a meeting so that everything is public, because it's a deliberation.
Okay.
And I know it's hard, but it's just, that's the way this thing is constructed.
At some point, probably it's not going to happen before the end of the DSTAC. I'd like to talk to you about publicly visible wikis and mailing lists, because I think there are some technological tools that would keep things out in the open that can be used.
And I haven't done it because I'm not very technological, but I know that we've had wikis used in one or two of our other groups, and it seemed to have worked pretty well. As what you're saying is make it all public, and then that's sort of a good workaround, because that might be a good tool that you guys could even use here.
Yeah, it was useful in the VPAC, certainly. So, okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
What about communications from members of the public or Congress that the public might want to send to all of these tech members?
Yeah, communications that you want to make available to members of the committee, I should have mentioned that too, because GSA was really strong on that. It does not go directly from members of the public to members of the committee. It needs to go through the DFO, and they will then distribute it, and they will put it on the record.
And the docket that was set up?
They were very firm about that, yeah.
The docket that was set up 1564 is not something we should file in directly. We should send something to...
It should go through. Yes, it should go through. It should go through them. That would be the right way, and then they'll put it right in that docket. Yeah.
So, what about the situation where experts are invited in to give input to a process in the working group?
Mm-hmm.
There's direct communication between those non-members and the committee. It sounds like you're
for a working group,
further restricting this.
No, not at all. For a working group, if you want members, if we want expert help, someone to come in and give opinions, that's fine. That doesn't restrict anything at all. I'm really here talking pretty much about documents, and a member of the public or an expert coming in to talk to the working group is fine. It's not putting anything over a quorum. And I mean, so that's okay. That just proceeds apace.
Well,
not a problem
during the public.
So that's not a problem at all. That's not a problem at all. John?
Sorry, I'm going to be weird again. So, as the DBS guy in the committee, I was asked to join Working Group 2 as an expert. So, while I was presenting information to the Working Group 2 meeting, there were 10 members of the DSTAC there, but my role was as an expert. Was that clean? Was that clear?
That would be fine as long as you, I think the ideal way to do that is you'd be like an expert presenter, just as though you weren't, just like the guy sitting behind you, and that once you'd done your thing, answered your questions, et cetera, you would basically leave, and you wouldn't be voting, and people wouldn't be, you wouldn't be part of the discussion where they said that was a great idea John had, or that was a terrible idea John had. I mean, you would just be removed. Yeah.
Thanks.
So hopefully that's it. I hope I didn't exceed my 10 minutes.
No, this was very helpful. I think we should have had it earlier, actually.
And if you don't like the advice, you can blame GSA. But if there are wrinkles to this that you want to discuss further, or, wikis, I can, we can move on that. But that's a particularly good idea if we could get it up and, if it works for some of the groups. Okay?
Okay, thanks so much.
Sure.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Joe, who's going to give the working group 2? Is it you or Bob?
Bob and I agreed that Bob would kick it off. And,
okay, fair enough.
Here's the cable posse.
You're up, Mr. Klein.
Good morning. I'd first like to thank the Working Group 2 for all of their extra effort that went into our traveling, our weekend calls, our night calls, and just a thank you from me for all the extra effort. The project assignment for Working Group 2 was to report on each of the distribution systems architecturally that are in place today and the differences in how commercial requirements and threats are met. I've asked Mark, Aman, and Bruce to each take one of the sections in the report, and then Joe, anytime you feel you want to jump in, please do. And any questions, please feel free to ask them. So with that, I'll turn over the microphone to Aman.
Sure. Joe, do you have any comments? Or?
However, so, as Bob said, a lot of the sections, of course, are on current MVPD technologies and approaches, so we'll have those presentations. And then, as Bob said, I'll be presenting the section on the cable card technology and system.
Sure. And, I'll talk about the distribution technologies, and we kind of covered those in detail the last time, so I'll try to be brief. There are typically four main systems we are dealing with: cable, satellite, IPTV, and a hybrid system. That's an example is Verizon. For the cable systems, typically what they're using is RF and QAM for distribution. And if you look at the history of cable companies, there's no uniformity in terms of technology or distribution technology in the cable space. And the reason is because they have used different vendors and technologies over the years. And today, even if a company is owned by the same, or a system is owned by the same company, they have different CAS, conditional access, core ciphers, video codecs, and things like that. So you don't really find uniformity in the cable space. So do you want to add anything to the cable? The second distribution systems we covered in the report is DBS. And the two companies are Dish and DirecTV. We talked in the morning or earlier in the morning about the one-way systems in the DBS space. So this is one of the key takeaways. DBS is a one-way system, so they can't count on a reliable return path like the two-way systems we have. In terms of their, if you look at the transport stream for Dish and Direct, they are different. So there are differences in the transport stream. They have different conditional access. So there are many differences. And John, do you want to add anything else?
There's a section of the report that lists pretty clearly the differences. The commonalities are, I think, we both use bytes.
Yeah, at some level, everyone uses bytes. I didn't want to spend too much time, so this is since we covered this in more detail. So it's just I'm hitting just the highlights. And then we have the IPTV system, which UVerse is an example. It's a pure IP system. We use a managed IP network for distribution of content. And in the UVerse system, we use multicast and unicast for linear live TV. and we use unicast IP for VOD. In terms of DRM, we are using Microsoft Windows Media Room DRM for set-top boxes, and then PlayReady DRM for other devices such as smartphones, tablets, and PCs. And then the last system is a hybrid system, and Verizon is an example there. It's basically a QAM IP system. They are emulating the cable network for linear live distribution of content. But the difference there is they are using IP for their return path as opposed to an RF return path that's used by cable companies. So that's a key difference there. And then they use IP for VOD. In the report, we also have a number of technology discussions around DRM, core ciphers, and other video codecs and things like that I think you'll find interesting. So that's all I had to cover this morning. If there are questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
One quick question.
Sure.
So clearly the ways that the functional requirements are carried out depend on the capabilities of the lower layers. But just to do a quick check, are any of the functionalities actually carried out in layers 1 through 3?
I'm not sure if I get the question answered.
I would expect that cable systems and satellite systems and other systems you've talked about, that the way that layers 1 through 3 are implemented very much depends on the nature of those channels. But I would not expect generally that any of the functional requirements discussed by Working Group 1 would actually be implemented in layers 1 through 3. I would expect generally they'd all be implemented at higher layers. And I'm looking to see whether I need to be corrected on this.
So broadcast DBS doesn't map nicely into the ISO layer model. You can't see local markets from Colorado from the East Coast because the spot beam for Colorado is over Colorado. You can see it from Nebraska, but you're not allowed to watch it because of a mixture of functions that sort of map into layer 2, layer 3, and I think layer 5, if I remember right. It is a combination of all of those involving not presenting the channels at the user interface, denying entitlements to decrypt the streams, and essentially overlaying the information with the actual locals you would get in Nebraska at the layer 2 level. So other than that, sure. It is not a network that maps nicely into the ISO model. It is a broadcast system.
Except for AT&T Uverse IPTV, which is a typical IP network.
Yeah. So other systems, I think, map much more nicely at various levels. Even although the cable QAM distribution is also very much a broadcast-centric kind of model. I think when you start looking at VOD and the IP VOD for DBS or the IP delivered systems for Uverse and some of the return path information on Verizon is my understanding, that maps nicely into network. But yeah, I'll try and start thinking of things in that model, but that's not the way satellite guys think about the broadcast network. That just, it's not the right mental map. It breaks too many fundamental assertions. But I'll see if I can map into that as we go on.
Any other questions? No?
Okay. Bruce? All right. So the next section here in the document, we try and articulate how these systems protect against the current security threats and risks and the other commercial requirements that kind of drive security requirements into the systems. Of course, conditional access systems turn on and off the video, but there are a whole variety of other threats that and security requirements the operators must address. So we've tried to describe some of these mechanisms here in the document. Of course, as everyone knows, the video distributors assemble a collection of licensed commercial content with individually negotiated copyright licenses and with the content owners and the licensors. The OTT operators do a similar thing, so Netflix or Sling TV or Apple, have similar agreements that these licenses drive terms and conditions into their requirements. So things like what level of security robustness needs to apply for their content, how the content may be distributed, where it can be distributed. Is it an in-home only right, or can it be streamed outside the home? What other sort of uses they have for the content, what the distribution rights are. What types of devices the content can be distributed on, generally, tied to the capability of the device, what sort of security capabilities are embedded in the device. The MVPDs have affiliation agreements and retrans deals that also address things like the channel assignments and the neighborhood where the channel may be placed, what sort of ads can go in, all those sorts of things kind of drive the requirements. So the video providers are using a combination of software and how the content's delivered really as a package, as an integrated service to protect against these breaches of their licensing requirements and the security requirements. So the document goes on to describe the chain of trust model that the MVPDs are relying on to assure the secure flow of content from the supplier to the distributor over to the end consumer. Ralph did a lot of work describing the complexity of the current CAS and DRM systems today, so there's a fairly good description in the document about how these systems work and the flow and the relationship between all the different players in the system and the ecosystem. So for CAS as an example, you can draw the relationship between the content providers, the MVPDs, the CAS vendors, the set-top makers, and the application developers, all the way through middleware guide aggregation, guide data aggregation, and then right down to the companies that put the keys into the chips and build the boxes in the factory. And then there's the whole process around how you qualify those chips, how the box gets qualified, and all the way through back into the content owners who are looking for that validation. So I think the takeaway that you kind of get of reading the document is there's a lot of complexity around the relationship, the contracts that are in place, the warranties, the licenses, and the responsibility between the different players that go into creating today's existing security system and architecture. It's a lot more than just a cable card in a box, really is the message here, I think. So ultimately, we need to make sure that the service itself is delivered, that things like billing is supported, things like, features like instant upgrade on the screen is available. Consumers can instantly upgrade their service. And of course, things like advertising commitments are met. The discussion that we had in the working group at this point, I think, really highlighted some of the disagreement around, what retail devices need to do to fit into this system. The MVPDs are delivering a service to retail devices today in ways that respect their license obligations, the contracts that they have and their obligations. And, at this point have been fairly successful, not a lot of litigation around how that's working today. Content providers and the MVPDs think that the content and the service that gets handed off to the device and the handling of that content needs to be consistent with the license terms, the contracts that they have today. Similar sorts of arrangements on OTT providers have similar obligations, and of course they're delivering their content to retail devices and meeting those requirements. There was quite a bit of debate in the working group around whether those obligations that the MVPD has extends to a retail device provider, or do those obligations kind of end at the handoff point to the retail device. And so you'll see some of that, I think, in the document, some of the, trying to reflect some of the different thinking around that topic. And really, we had a lot of discussion over what is the service that we're providing. Is it kind of the service of 15 years ago of linear channels and VOD, or is it, which was protected with today's cable card architecture and technology? Or is it much more advanced where it is today, a much more interactive service? And, as we think about the recommendation here, trying to take into account really today's service definition as opposed to something 15 years ago. So you think about things like not just guide data and on-demand, but things like start over and look back, search from recommendations, and other specialized applications that are kind of built into today's package of service offerings. And then you also have to think about, we tried to describe the pace of change for the service. Constantly there are innovations going into the offering and feature updates that are occurring, multiple times a month now that need to be accommodated with the recommendations that we come up with. So I think that was the section kind of at a high level on how today's network architectures try to meet the commercial requirements, security requirements. The next section we tried to describe a little more detail around the variety of different ways that the service providers have been enhancing their service offering, and got into a description on what was called the apps model. It's a pretty adopted technique by service providers pretty successfully. You see some statistics on how deployed the different service provider application environments are across the U.S. today. And it's a significantly different approach to the protocol or API model. And I know the industry spent a lot of time trying to perfect the API model around OCAP and True Two-Way, and try and standardize around that fairly unsuccessfully, as opposed to where we're at with the application model, which is a much more widely deployed approach to delivering content to a variety of devices. So you'll see a description around the app model and how it leverages the different CE manufacturer platforms across Android and iOS and HTML type interfaces. Whole variety of different types of smart TVs with different types of middlewares and different types of operating environments being supported by this approach. Obviously, a pretty similar architecture being used by consumer electronics devices today that abstract the differences between the different types of platforms. So you can go, see examples of Netflix apps, Amazon apps, other over-the-top video distributors providing kind of similar capabilities. So lots of description around what the current MVPDs are doing. Really, I think the top 10 MVPDs in the U.S. all delivering content using that app model. Not all of the services are available through these apps. Some of the content rights don't allow that sort of distribution. So the license agreements need to be taken into account, but they continue to really grow in availability. So this app model tried to describe here on the CE platforms really creates a retail mall type approach where the consumer can really select a variety of different approaches for getting at their content. And so if you don't like Mark's Xfinity app, you can switch over to Jay's Charter app or to a Netflix app, so that consumer choice, really being enabled and embodied through that approach. We saw some demonstrations of various different types of apps already today. We saw a Time Warner app running on a Samsung TV, really integrated into the existing Samsung navigation ribbon, right next to a Netflix app or another OTT app running on that CE device. No set-top box required to be able to support that service. A whole variety of different types of everywhere and anywhere type applications available. So the report then goes on to describe some alternative approaches. There's a good description on how something called VidiPath works today, and RView used in a DBS environment, both developed through a multi-industry body and included as part of the DLNA guidelines. They both deliver a MVPD service via this sort of app approach to a client device, and provide a remote user interface, basically an ability to display the user interface on a consumer device. VidiPath is an example using HTML5 with security extensions from the W3C. So I think those were the two sections, Bob.
Okay. Would you like to open it up to questions on the floor?
This is Joe. Just I want to thank Bruce. As he mentioned, there was some vigorous debate in terms of one of the tenets that, as it was called in Working Group 1, on what constitutes service in the app, and so we don't need to debate those there. I think it's in the document. Just two things as you brought up. One is this incorrect statement that if the user doesn't like the Comcast Xfinity app, then they can choose the Charter app. Well, the reality is most consumers have only one choice of their cable operator, so they only get one choice in the app. And that's what we were talking about, this ability for a third-party navigation device to offer choice to the consumer. But the other one, too, one of the later debates that unfortunately did not get into the document was Bruce was talking about the threats, and we understand, from a long history in terms of cable card, the idea of threat to service or harm to network. A new one that you mentioned that like clarification on is interference with advertising as a requirement for conditional access. I wonder if you could, or one of the operators, tell us why we would add interference with advertising to the list of things like harm to the network, like blowing up the wires or stealing service and giving it to your neighbors. Why is interference with advertising on the same par as breaking the network?
I'm not sure it's on the same par as breaking the network, Joe. I think it's just one of a list of things that need to be considered. It's part of the business model around how the service gets provided. So I don't know, Mark, thoughts?
Well, am I on? Yeah. I think that's probably right. I mean, there's probably multiple layers to harm to the network, just like there's multiple layers to the network. Just one quick correction, though, Joe. I think, Bruce, you got it wrong. You can't switch from Jay's app to mine.
Today you can't.
Today. Thanks a lot.
A new transaction, a new merger?
But I think the point might be if you don't like the DirecTV app, you can switch to the Comcast app. If you don't like the Comcast app, you can switch to the Google app. John Card's Dish app. If you don't like the Dish app, you can switch to the AT&T app. That's probably the multiples that we usually have 4 competitors in any one market. So there are multiple apps you could kind of switch to as you switch to different services. So I think that was the point probably. And on top of that, you can go to the Netflix app, the Google app, the Amazon app, the Hulu app, ad nauseum. So I think that was probably what you're trying to say, Bruce.
Probably.
Okay.
It's Adam Goldberg. I mean, with respect, Mark, I don't think being able to switch providers is the same thing as being able to switch experience or the way you
don't
interact
disagree.
with the service.
It's a much bigger decision to switch providers. One customers make a lot.
Are there any other questions?
One question about, if I focus just on the security module, I've heard, I think, a couple of different, again, I'm going to zoom out, look at it just in terms of an architectural description. Should I think of it as, for interoperability, what we need is a description of the interface or the interfaces in terms of inputs and outputs of the security module, choice 1. Choice 2, I need the description of the interfaces plus the functionality that the module accomplishes. Or choice 3, we need to standardize or describe, standardize the algorithms that module implements.
If I may, this is Joe. I think we might get to some of that when we get to my part of the report. And so I wonder if we should just finish with the report and then get to that question, because I addressed some of that, I think, in the cable card section.
Yeah, that's fine. We can come back to it.
If it's
There's
okay.
a discussion after that presentation.
Okay. We'll move on to over the top and IP transition. The report also describes how over-the-top services work and what is going on with an IP transition today. We've heard from Sling and from Amazon key takeaways on over-the-top. Once you are an over-the-top IP business, delivery business, you have to support multiple DRMs to support the variety of DRMs on customer-owned devices and required by content providers for specific content. Over-the-top content deals tell you what you can do on retail devices. For example, HD content providers insist on trusted video path and processing outside the general purpose CPU in a trusted executable environment. Similar to the MVPD's video on retail devices, over-the-top delivery works on downloading an app. Cable is in a transition to IP today. We are adding IP video to our cable systems. IP set-tops work very much like the over-the-top. They present a user interface via an application, use internet DRMs with hardware root of trust, comply with robustness rules, and support output protection and use security code downloads. This will be a long transition, like a digital transition where most operators have carried analog and digital on the same network for a long time. The presence of MPEG alone receiving devices in subscribers' home will also require a lengthy transition to IP. VidiPath was designed to support both MPEG video and IP, enabling service providers to transition from MPEG to an IP over time by adding applications and enabling client devices to a transition gracefully. So, would anybody like to add to that? Question?
Bob, it's Adam Goldberg. It troubles me when you say MPEG in one sentence and sometimes mean maybe MPEG video and sometimes maybe mean MPEG transport. So I'd appreciate it if you could be clear when you say MPEG if you mean MPEG transport.
I want to make sure I put this the right way. When we talk about putting an IP, we're talking about putting it over a DOCSIS. I'm talking cable world, over a DOCSIS modem using an MPEG transport. All right. When we talk about MPEG video over a QAM, we're talking about using a QAM that was designed just for video. It's not the same QAM as used for DOCSIS. Does that help?
Not at all.
Okay.
Are you saying that when you're talking about sending programming over IP, you're talking about sending an MPEG video in an MPEG to transport stream in an IP flow on a DOCSIS QAM channel?
Yes.
Transport stream.
Transport.
Thank you.
I think it's helpful when you think of DOCSIS to think of the MPEG transport stream as abstracted. It's in the.
It's either there or it's not, and I'm just trying to understand.
Oh, I'm just trying to help people conceptualize it. I'm not trying to minimize its role. I'm just saying the way that the IP network is designed, it is very much abstracted from how IP bits are delivered. So. So someone on the internet who's delivering bits to a customer of ours over a DOCSIS network needs to know zero that there's an MPEG transport stream underneath the, deep between the cable operator's head end and the household. So that's all I'm trying to say.
underneath DOCSIS is an MPEG framing layer, right at the very base, at the layer 2, if you will. So you've got physical, you've got an MPEG-2 frame, you've got the DOCSIS protocols, you've got IP as an abstraction, and then you've got your video streaming over top, which is encoded in MPEG compression formats. So it's confusing for sure, but that's the way it is.
So I'll make one mention. There's sort of the proximal association of Amazon's video players with the sort of pass-through control of rights holders. I made a presentation on Amazon's video players to Working Group 2. I made no such assertion. So, the constraints that we put on underlying hardware for our video playback are ours. I can't speak to contracts that we have with rights holders, but we assert those constraints. They are not pass-through constraints from rights holders. So.
Okay. I believe the last section we have is on cable cards, and I believe we have two presentations. Mark would like to give a short one first.
With Joe's permission, I just want to make a couple comments before I turn it over. Is that okay? So, obviously, cable MVPDs support cable cards. In fact, personally thank TiVo for the nice comments they often pass on about Comcast to the FCC. Our support for the cable card is not going to go anytime soon, but for most on the working group, it's not the right baseline for DStack. It was not designed as a platform-neutral solution. Cable cards are not used by Dish, DirecTV, AT&T, over-the-top providers, PCs, game platforms, et cetera, et cetera. They were originally designed for retail UDCPs that receive one-way linear cable services, but not services that required interactivity like VOD and interactive program guides. And there was never a choice to permanently strip off the guide to hand over content to a device with no responsibility to deliver service or respect content deals. And that was even stated in the actual cable card MOU. We have actually expanded, some MVPDs have expanded services for cable card, and we've done this through business-to-business deals. For example, TiVo is a customer that in Comcast markets can use our VOD service. And while we think, I think TiVo's got a wonderful service, by the way, and Hauppauge and Silicon Dust have done incredibly innovative things in this space with cable card. There's also been a cost to that. So that innovation has been great, but there's been a cost to the MVPDs on innovation. So cable was delayed in its transition to all digital. We got challenged when we tried to do switch digital. Verizon, as the report shows, was required to bolt on some redundant method of delivering entitlements. And in general, cable card's incompatible with some modern delivery formats, ISO-based media file formats, stuff like that. So cable card, exists. We support it, and I think Joe's going to add some more from there.
Thanks, Mark. As you said, in the cable card section, we have a technology here that's over 10 years old and has seen a large amount of change in terms of technology across cable operators, and it's been able to support all of that change. As we said, there's 50 million some devices ranging from simple zappers, they call them, set-top boxes, to whole home DVR solutions. We also saw this technology change from the original the time of the embodiment of cable card of MPEG-2 content being delivered on a single stream to today's multi-stream whole home cable card solutions. We even have a lower power version of the cable card. It's been able to successfully go from MPEG-2 content to MPEG-4 content, support switch digital, support IP delivery, support VOD pay-per-view. And so in terms of the technology, I would contest that it has not lacked innovation. As we discussed in the working group, it allowed a transition to all digital for cable operators. It did have a cost to them in the terms of they had to use cable card because of regulatory issues, but it did not delay that rollout. And as we said, Switch Digital is fully supported when the protocol, which actually is a quite simple protocol for Switch Digital, was enabled on the cable card devices. And so given that in terms of the technology, but also, as we said in the report, the cable card is the only technology today, even after these 10 years, that gives the user the choice in their cable set-top box connected to the primary viewing TV that works across cable operators and Verizon today. And it gives them access to all of that linear content. And as Mark said, with agreements beyond that for retail devices directly with operators, it can even be extended to the full interactive services. So given that its ability to innovate, that it goes across services, that it's been with us and continues to work over this time and gives consumers choices, and I brought one with me. What is it that made cable cards so successful in being able to do that? And I have some of the points here that I think are in there. One is we heard a lot about variation and differences in network technologies. And in fact, the word variation is used 5 times and difference is used 12 times, I think intentionally in the document. And that's the same situation we faced when cable card came out. There were variations in cable technology at the time, and we looked at what can be common and what can we just not agree to be common. And so the cable card took the stuff that couldn't be common and put it inside this opaque box. And it made protocols that were common between them. So an operator can choose what's inside this. They can update what's inside here. They can make renewability. They can innovate in terms of the protocols without the retail device that uses this having to know what their contracts are with CAS vendors, what their contracts are with the chips inside. In fact, as we say in the report at the end, they look at the non-cable card solution has a diagram with perhaps 25 arrows between license agreements here, chip vendors, CAS, DRM. And as we show in the final one, cable card takes to this Gordian knot a solution, thanks to the regulatory framework and the protocols, to say, look, here's where we draw a line, and retail devices do not have to enter into possibly dozens of negotiated rights just to get access to content. And so all of us would agree, certainly, that none of us want this cable card to be the new solution. All right, TiVo as well would love to see something that is much more new, much more modern. But the embodiment and the ecosystem that came with this should be, again, as we stated before, the model for what we do here in this committee. And so again, what is some of the things that it was able to do? One is, it is, within cable operators, platform neutral. It works across all cable systems. We were able to do that by taking variances, again, the word variations comes across quite common, and we put these inside this opaque box. The other is the use of protocols. We have a whole section on protocols versus common middleware approaches and software application approaches. We contend that one of the reasons this is successful, like the internet technology that we all use, it's based on protocols as opposed to application APIs. Another thing is, we brought up with from Mr. John Card in his discussion that there's a lot of variations in CAS and DRM and some functionality in there. And again, this succeeded because all of that is abstracted. It's within this opaque box. And finally, as I said, in terms of the Gordian knot and how it was split in terms of all these variations of contractual agreements that might be between an MVPD and the content provider and maybe even their advertisers, we have a working model where those don't apply necessarily to retail devices. And again, that should be the model we look for, not focusing on this particular technology or hardware, but as a, again, model for something of how we solved a similar solution over 10 years ago.
I've got a question about the abstraction layers that cable card provides, and I don't know, Joe, if you or Mark or somebody else around the table can either correct my understanding or provide some more information. I understand that cable card abstracts the details of the CAS or DRM system inside the little device. I believe that means that the various standards and specifications written around and for cable card don't talk about any of the performance capabilities of cable card itself, that those would be an internal document, say, for Aris or for somebody else who's providing the cable card to a service provider or to for provisioning in the market. Is that correct?
I guess I would ask for clarification, whoever wants to answer. You mean performance in terms of the card's internals or the interface to the card, the protocols?
Let's say the control interface for entitlements. How many entitlements does a cable card actually need to manage? I'm assuming that you can't, well, I'm assuming that's not generally known except for whoever designs that cable card. Is that generally correct?
Well, there's obviously some baseline assumptions a manufacturer like TiVo would have on what does that interface look like and what can I get in and out of it. As an example, how many simultaneous streams can I
let me ask the question another way. If I wanted to know if a cable card could manage 64 different entitlements, 200 different packages, and 15 operations a minute, would I look at an internal specification from the cable card manufacturer, or was there a standard you can point me at, or an external document, publicly visible document that'll answer that question?
I don't know for sure. Mark knows for sure.
It is. That's all internal stuff. Okay.
It's the former. The vendor of the CA system has got a lot of stuff in that card, and it's all up to them what's in that card.
Got it. So as we are looking at creating a downloadable security system for cable card, I believe we're going to need to consider some of those kinds of operational parameters here that would have been considered by the vendor separately. In other words, I know on the DISH system what my requirements are on my CAS vendor, and I can talk about, when appropriate, those kinds of requirements on this downloadable security system. Let's pretend the FCC is the vendor. You're not. I'm pretty sure you're not. So when it comes to that part of the conversation, I believe that that's new territory that wasn't addressed during the cable card discussions because it didn't have to be, and because it was wisely hidden inside that truly opaque box. I think we're going to need to crack open the opaque box a little bit and specify those performance characteristics here, so that we design a system that can actually replace or supplement or supersede the cable card. Is that assertion incorrect?
I'm not on work group 2, but I think that depending on how we choose to solve the problem, you may need to there may needs to be something said about minimum characteristics of the platform that runs whatever's downloaded.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether you're downloading it to a cable card or what. You've got to have a platform that you're writing software for if you're going to have downloaded software.
Got it. Okay.
Of course, I suspect the moment we put a box around it, the box will have moved as well. It'll be part of the challenge, right?
Okay. And
trying to plan for the future.
Okay. And then secondly, I've read the cable card, the SCTE documents that describe the operations of cable card, and I noticed that the section that talks about pay-per-view authorizations and how that process works through cable card has been deprecated by the SCTE. Does anybody on the committee know of anyone who successfully built and fielded a cable card or a system that used the pay-per-view features of cable card?
In a retail model?
Yes, or in whatever the opposite, in a leased box model, either one.
That uses the pay-per-view.
That uses the pay-per-view interfaces and those capabilities.
Yeah.
Those were actually used in the field.
I believe so. I'll check for you, but I'm pretty sure they have.
Okay, because again, I think the charge talking about from the DBS guy and going back to your ISO or OSI model, pay-per-view starts to intermix some layer 6 and 7 stuff with some layer 2 stuff. And we could spend about a half hour, I think, talking about the two kinds of networks that DBS uses. One, the in-home distribution that's switched, which is very much like a multicast network, and then the broadcast network side, which is not. but obviously feeds the in-home network. If we never have that half-hour conversation, that's fine. The IGMP join messages that you'd expect to think of for multicasting make sense within the home, make no sense outside the home, so there's a clean delineation. Sorry, that's a very... You're nodding your head, so I'm hoping that this means something. Okay. So as we look at trying to, as a DBS provider, trying to provision and provide the same uniform sort of services that we're talking about, so the dish service and the DirecTV service should be kind of uniform with what we're expecting to get from cable. We have linear channels which map very nicely, I think, to all of the systems. Although AT&T uses DRM, everybody else is using CAS. When we start looking at pay-per-view, that is a major feature of DBS today, and I believe it's supported on many cable systems, but is not that interesting because the cable systems have been moved, I believe, have moved much more to VOD. Dish and Direct also support VOD, and we've got two different architectures that support that as well. So purely from the business side, if I need to support linear, pay-per-view, and all the kinds of VOD I've got, that's where lots of my requirements are coming from. If there's a subset of that, great. Then I'll start throwing things off the boat left and right.
Question was answered.
Okay. Do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think Working Group 2 is finished.
Actually, John's first question of that set, I think, teed back up my original question, which I want to throw back at you now. So the question I asked was, should I think of it as that the security module, that DStack's work should be to specify the interfaces or protocols? For the moment, let me not distinguish between those two. Or is it the interfaces or protocols plus a description of the functionality? Or is it specification of what's in that module?
Can you describe the differences between your 1 and 2?
So 1 would be just specify the inputs and outputs, right? If I think of it as a software routine, it's the inputs and outputs being passed to that subroutine, right? The second one is inputs and outputs plus a functional description, but not a specification of how it's implemented. And the third one is the first two and a specification of how it's implemented.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm being dense, but I still don't understand what distinction you're making between the first and second.
The first one is you don't even tell me what the module's doing. I just know what the output of it is. I know what the input is and the output is.
Right.
Second one, I also have a functional description of what that module's doing. The traditional software approach would be number 2, right? Number 1
my take on that, and let me give it a try, John, and then you can correct me. The conditional access aspects of it we can talk about what features should be enabled by it, but we're not going to say how, right? And I think your second maybe has a little bit of how, right?
Also seems to me not all WG2 did was to describe the systems. Seems like you're asking questions of
the future.
Probably future working groups.
Yeah,
we could turn this into a big working group, but that would take a long time, I think.
I can delay my flight. So I think I understand your question. And so, for example, when we look at a feature of the service like pay-per-view, which is supported and enabled by the CAS system running on Dish, and I'll just speak about Dish, but I think DirecTV is virtually the same. One of the features that is necessary for pay-per-view as a business proposition to work is that there is that once a pay-per-view purchase is authorized on demand in the home, that record of that purchase doesn't evaporate until it is correctly cleared by Dish. In other words, we collect that record and then eventually we choose to bill the customer, or we decide, well, that was 4 years ago, they've left the system, it's just not worth billing them $5 for a 4-year-old pay-per-view movie when we finally see their receiver. So a feature of the CAS system is this non-volatile, truly non-volatile memory. There is no reset button the customer can press that says, forget the pay-per-view that I just ordered. If this is a downloadable security system that is running on arbitrary third-party hardware, that's a feature that I think we do need to specify in the guts of the system. The number of entitlements that can be managed by the DCAS, I think, is also a feature inside. So if you start to include the management interfaces, not just the content interfaces, then maybe we can put a lot of things out at the API layer and hide a lot of the details. I'm with Adam. I don't want to talk about how you build all of this stuff, but I do think there are some interfaces that haven't been described for cable card, for example, like the management. Here's how many things you can authorize and how many you can't.
So, John, I think you're mixing APIs or protocols and resources.
Yes.
So the cable card, again, sorry, it's a great example. But there was requirements on resources, power. I think that was one of the resources. So what you're talking about, though, are resources like involatile memory and resources like computing power.
Yep.
Again, these are not necessarily, we don't have to mandate protocols and procedures or policy on them, but I think you're right. In a separate working group, we could say to meet some of the interface requirements, like I want to watch HBO or I want to order this pay-per-view, there can be resource requirements, if necessary. It could be abstracted in a separate piece of hardware, or that could be mandated on a new piece of hardware that support the downloadable. So I just want to make sure. I think what you're talking about are resources. And things like,
some of what I'm talking about is resources.
CPU power, involatile memory, secure data. Again, we could talk about it in a working group, but that can easily meet, I think, the requirements you're talking about.
Most of them. The other side of it then is going to be the operations, say operations per minute, operations per second. How long does it actually take me to provision one of these things? If it takes 2 days of calculating on a CPU, we've failed. I don't think it's going to take 2 days. But if it takes 20 seconds, that might be a problem. And it might take 20 seconds to clear all of the bits. So, yes, you're right. Most of these things are resources. And, again, I think these are things that were hidden inside the cable card module that we now need to expose the right ones. I'm not sure yet what all of those are. I know Robin Wilson has contributed and talked about the downloadable, the download feature, the way that you maintain and keep your system once it needs to be replaced, securely replaced.
And I believe in working group 2, we actually, I think, made reference that there are some of these standards for that. For example, RDK has a specification on the hardware chip that I think addresses almost everything you talked about. So
Good.
maybe that could be made available.
I would love to point at existing standards and say, let's do those 4 things and not that 5th one.
John, we also talked about in the group that we didn't do a lot to explain the rest of the network that goes with the cable. We get caught up on that nice, thanks for holding that up, that nice cable card there. But there's an infrastructure, a back office that goes with that includes things like billing interfaces and adapters and downloadable capabilities. And I mean, there's a whole infrastructure kind of on the network side that we just felt was too complex to try and describe in the document. But probably we end up there at some point as we think about the requirements for this.
Okay, are we finished the discussion of the 2 reports? Okay. Very good reports, very useful. They represent a prodigious amount of work. I suspect some of you have only a dim memory of your day jobs, but it's greatly appreciated, and I think they'll be very helpful as we go forward. Which is what we need to talk about now. The real hard work starts now. Do you want to, Brendan, talk about what we're going to do next? If you can have the mic.
So I hope everyone received and at least had a few minutes to look at the 2 outlines that were sent out last night. One sent by John Card. Unfortunately, I didn't tell you whose was whose. I'm hoping that people were able to figure out whose was whose, but John's is the one that says outline of DStack report draft 4/12/2015, and then Adams was the one titled outline September 4th, 2015 DStack report. I doubt that we'll come up with a full outline right now, but I'd love to hear everyone's reactions and just open it up to discussion to hear what people think. I think that'll help inform us as we decide what the next working group should be. Love to hear feedback on that as well.
So since Adam used the word ultimate in his title, I'd like to add extraordinary in my title. I took a look at the report that Adam outlined that he provided and did some comparison with what I looked at. I think we're looking at some similar features. He's got a different overall organization to his report, but I'm hoping that the common bits between the two outlines at least are ones that make it into our final report. I also, in that email that I sent out, I apologize not having heard the direction, I had suggested that whatever working groups we next form should be targeted towards beginning to fill out whatever the parts of the outline that we've got that need to be done. So I had a couple suggestions for working groups to start looking, in one case, diving into the security, the features, functions, resources of this, and APIs of the security module, and the second one to start looking at, let's say, the characteristics of the hardware that this security module is going to have to run on, whether that be the list of chips that other standards or other specifications point at, or the computing power or battery lifetime even of mobile devices, or expectation over time of what kinds of devices these things are going to need to run in. That's the purpose of that other working group that I had proposed. There are certainly other things that we are going to need to talk about before we're all done, but I think those two, the real-world application of what we design, as well as enough of the guts of what we design to know that we're building something that's possible and can be managed, seem to be two necessary working groups before we go too far. I think that's about all. I don't mean to exclude any of the names of folks that I talked with, although after hearing the guidance, maybe I will assert that I don't remember talking to a quorum. I certainly didn't get feedback from a quorum. Some folks did a virtual or a physical nodding of the head. And the appendices that I list in my outline were added to kind of depend. I wasn't sure how the records of what we're doing are going to be maintained. If the working group 1 and 2 reports are going to be maintained separately from this report in the whatever permanent record of our activities, then we may not need as many appendices as I thought. But one thing that the appendices could be used for would be to attach the working group 1 and the working group 2 reports that were just received. It's also wise with engineers to give them a place to throw all the extra stuff. So
are you done? So my take on the ultimate outline, or the super duper outline, was sort of fundamentally take the language from the Stella Act and write it down in an outline form. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that what we need to do is what we were directed to do, which is sort of to identify, report, and recommend some technology that meets certain requirements, not unduly burdensome, uniform, and technology and platform neutral. And so that's sort of how I laid out the outline that make room to identify specific technology and room for discussions of how it meets the requirements for the solution that the law places on us. I think that whether there's appendix or appendices or annexes or whatever, I mean, I think the sort of details around how the document gets packaged up is something we can deal with. I think I ought to point out that though there's not normally when you look at an outline, you get to the end and there's a conclusion. I didn't mean to presuppose that there wouldn't be a conclusion, more that the conclusions are sort of scattered throughout the report. Although I suppose that that was maybe an oversight on my part. We're going to have to conclude at some point as well.
Joe, TiVo, to your original question, I think the thing that strikes me in comparing the two is John's continuation of this taxonomy of what's out there, and I think as Adam put at the end, but no step forward to the meat of what we're supposed to be doing here. I mean, I think he has sub-bullets A through Z, and I believe if we gave them leniency a couple more months to do it, it could have A through double Z. So, but the point is that doesn't get us to where we're supposed to go. So I think less on the taxonomy and more, as the other one points about, let's get to the meat of what we're supposed to be doing here.
Actually, Joe, I apologize. It's not as clear as it could be then. If you look on towards the end of the outline, there's a section under the evaluation of the burden. The point of listing the various devices here that this might run on would be to analyze the burden, let's say, on a tablet. Can this system that we have proposed and those requirements that it has to meet, which are the A through double Z, and maybe it's only A through F. I'm not sure at this point, but I didn't want to preclude any requirements yet. I think we do need to analyze, can this run on a tablet? Can it run on a gaming platform? Can it run on an existing TiVo box? Can it run on a future Hauppauge card in a PC or a Mac? Can it run on a VidiPath system? Does it apply itself to the W3C model with EME or not? If we don't analyze those current methods for consuming content, and we say we're going to wipe the slate clean and everything we built to date doesn't matter, fine, then let's start afresh and say we don't care about any legacy devices. That's a much different proposition, though, than the real-world implementation, which is going to take literally years, and we're going to need to, and again, looking down through the summary evaluation, we're going to need to consider things like what is the power or the energy required for this DCAS, let's say on a mobile phone battery. Can the algorithms that we're pointing at, if we use, let's say, AES-128, which seems quite likely, how many devices that are in the field can run that, and if there are enough of them, can we emulate the rest of the CAS that might someday be implemented in the hardware in enough legacy devices to be interesting, or do we need to literally put ourselves on a 5-year clock or a 2-year clock or a 10-year clock before the system can actually be implemented in fielded devices? So that was my intention there. The other is the recommendations, which are all shown as TBD, because I don't know what the recommendations are going to come out of us as it pertains to video providers, retail devices. Currently available solutions might be null. There might be nothing we can do for currently fielded devices. And then near-term solutions, there may be products that are on the planning stage literally today. If we can hold off 6 months or the next generation of products, we may be able to say, oh, yeah, they're all going to have a root of trust because they're all going to handle 4K content. So let's take advantage of that. Or maybe we can't say that. So I apologize it wasn't clear that I was trying to be forward-looking and trying to understand how we're going to get from where we are now to actually rolling out and implementing the system. It was not my intent to only analyze what we have today. I think we're largely done with that analysis of what's today. Those 2 working group reports are as complete as we're going to get, I think. Thanks.
Jay, you have some?
Jay Rolls with Charter. Adam, I thought yours was a little light actually on the security, specifics on security itself. And in fact, John's list, this A through Z list, is anything but frivolous. I mean, reading from some of these: secure boot process, device authentication, trusted execution environment, protected video. I mean, these are all core pieces of a secure video delivery system and encryption system. So I think these are important elements to be in there. The only other thing that caught my eye and concerned me a little bit about Adam's outline is there's some sort of a little bit of presupposing the outcome, because there's talking about the taking apart or certainly insinuates programming streams, audio, video, metadata, services ancillary to video programming. I think in John's outline, it doesn't. We've talked a lot about application as being a potential outcome. It doesn't actually say application in the outline, so I'd like to steer away from anything that starts to define what the solution is already, since we're not there yet.
I think that to just be perfectly clear, it should be no surprise to anyone that an outline that I create is going to meet the requirements that I've made about competitive user interfaces, portability, and et cetera. I think that those are the core and vital aspects to what we are having to identify or architect here. Without doing those things, which I know that you have objection to, I think that we will have completely failed.
And then the place you go is, potential. You start listing them all then from the different viewpoints. So.
Any other comments?
This is Milo. Again, I think the question from the perspective of we need to focus in on the set of solutions that are encompassed in the requirements. If we can't make both of these things, all of them work, then I think we have to go back to some form of scope document to determine priority. But I think the application case, Jay, if I'm not mistaken, that's almost always delivered today through an IP path, not the primary video path. But I'd be curious in if you would disagree with that or not.
Well, there are multiple ways of doing the application. If you take the middleware on our video only boxes today, those are obviously delivered not in IP. Those are applications as well.
But for all of the non-MSO devices, TVs, etc., it's my understanding that that's all delivered via an IP path all the way through and not actually using the primary video path, right? In other words, outside of your own hardware.
I think that's probably a true statement, although I think one of the things we pointed out in Working Group 2 is that's now a moving target.
Mark, I'm sorry, I can't really hear you.
Yeah, maybe I got to get closer. I've moved the mic instead of snuggling up to Jay. I think that's probably true, but I think one of the things we did in Working Group 2 was point out there's the beginnings right now of a transition to all IP delivery. So our primary video path, at least in the cable world, is changing as we sit here. As a matter of fact, Comcast has a full Title VI linear and VOD service that's now being delivered to multiple devices. So it's just a changing world, Milo.
No, I understand that. I do think one of the requirements, we did talk about this in Working Group 1 at one point. I'm not sure it got digested into the actual doc, is third-party devices should be able to access content in the same quality as the operator's own devices. Certainly, we would not want, for our service, users having a poorer quality experience. And given the fact that the primary feeds tend to be higher resolution and higher encoded at higher bit rates than the kind of mobile feeds that get sent to sort of apps today, I think that's something that we want to make sure is taken care of. We don't want third-party devices or apps devices to suffer an inferior quality experience. And I'm not just talking about video, I'm talking about multi-channel audio and the rest as well. And that's going to play a bigger role as 4K rolls out.
I'm not sure I understand why you think there would be an inferior.
This is Jay Milo. I think our goal, we're aligned with you there. We don't want, if we start delivering services in IP, we don't want them to be any different or any inferior to our Qualcomm delivered services.
I understand. Just in the context of the conversation that was just occurring, we were talking about mobile devices, iPads, et cetera. Those are typically not fed with the primary streams today. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had on their path that we want to make sure same quality streams go to everybody.
This is Ahmad Ansari, AT&T. Milo, to your comment about these different devices, first of all, these devices have different capabilities, resolutions, frame rates, decoding capabilities. So they are not designed the same way as like a 4K TV. So they have, in the case of IPTV service providers, we have IP everywhere for set-top boxes as well as other devices. So that doesn't really apply. So we have an IP network. And it looks like cable and others are also moving towards that IP network. And again, we don't believe we provide the quality of our service to other devices or lower quality than, because resolutions, again, those devices are different. This is how we tailor our service to make sure we have an optimized experience on those devices as well.
Again, it goes back to the definition of what service is. If you're primarily in the video transport business, it's up to the device guy to actually, or gal, I guess, to build in the interface to take the video and adapt it to whatever limitations that device has. I think the challenge is making sure that the highest quality video is available to third-party devices. If as an operator, if I have to worry about every single last device and adapting the streams to that quality, it's going to be a challenge. It's best to have the third party be responsible for that.
Milo, this is John.
Unless you want to decide that you're going to support arbitrary operating systems, arbitrary devices, and arbitrary form factors for any possible device out there.
Milo, this is John Card. Yeah, you just described the decision that Dish made. Dish includes in its Hopper set-top box the ability to do a lot of transcoding, so that we do take our primary video stream, and when we can feed that directly to an end device, that's great. The customer gets the best quality video, and in fact, some of the language in our agreements with content providers kind of mandate that we not artificially screw up their video because it's their video. However, where we need to transcode down because a first or second generation device can't handle 1080p content, and the decision for the customer is no content versus a down-res version of it, we absolutely do down-res. We have that hardware. That's an investment that Dish has made in the set-top boxes it has deployed. So I think we do have a difference in philosophy between our organizations in the way that we provide the video. I understand what you're saying. It would be nice if we could say you got to be able to handle 1080p 60 in order to handle any of my high quality content. That doesn't serve the end customer very well when they don't have any of those devices yet. As soon as they get them, we do want to serve it, but until they get them, if they've got a 1080i TV, we'll provide a version of 1080i video. And remember, this is coming off of DBS distribution, where my bandwidth is, I suspect, a fraction of the bandwidth that you can put over your fiber. So I am, because of that architecture, required to do some different things in the devices I provision in the home. I'm not saying that these differences are a problem between our organizations, but we have indeed made different choices. I think we can agree, and we do provide the best quality video under the circumstances. The other point I want to make, which is very important to Dish, is we don't control the last mile run of IP service. We are not an internet service provider. Hughes has Hughes, which is part of EchoStar, which is sister company to Dish, does have a satellite IP system, but it doesn't serve very many people. The folks that serves can't be served any other way, essentially. So because we don't control that last leg, we have adapted, we've put a lot of effort into adaptive rate video as well, so that in any particular circumstance, even if your device can handle full 1080 resolution, you might be at the end of an LTE link that's overloaded because you're on a train, and all you get to see is 200 by 240 video. That's the best we can do at the time. So we're not happy with it. Nobody's really happy with it, including the end consumer, but some video is better than none. If you're looking for kind of a mission statement to provide the best video possible under the circumstances, yes, we absolutely sign up to that. But if you're looking for a mission statement of no video unless it's the best video, then we do definitely disagree.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with you, John. I think that just the question is, whose responsibility is it? Right? Is it the third-party device's job to deal the adaptation, or is it the video transport provider, aka the MVPD's job, to do that?
Right. And so far, Dish has signed up to undertake that job in the devices we field. Others have made different decisions. I will agree on that.
John Godfrey?
Find a microphone that works. John Godfrey with Samsung. I think you're probably looking for us to choose an outline, but I have a really fundamental concern that I'm not sure how much progress we're going to be able to make under either outline until we have a better idea of what the goal is. The working group that Samsung participated in, Working Group 2, was really supposed to describe the current technology, which sounds pretty straightforward, but there was a huge amount of time spent on describing how the technology that exists today relates to various aspects of the goal of this project, and people have different opinions about the goal of the project, so it took an enormous amount of time. I think that's going to be multiplied by 10 or 100 when we turn to making recommendations. Both outlines start off with a restatement of what the Stella reauthorization stated is the mission. That mission isn't crystal clear, and I can give just two examples, but there could be many examples. One is that one of the goals is to promote competitive availability. Promote's a pretty vague word. Does it mean provide a complete toolkit that will enable competitive availability for devices that can offer all MVPD services in a competitive way, or just some of them? Does it mean just some of the tools, and then makers of competitive devices are then on their own to obtain the additional tools that they need? It's really unclear. I think if the goal means solve all problems for all possible competitive devices, it's clearly an impossible task. It cannot be done. But I don't think we have clarity on what we're shooting for. And then the only other thing I'll mention quickly and then stop, we've heard today, and it came up many times in Working Group 2, is how much of the non-security related requirements of MVPD services and content do we need the solution coming out of DStack to address? Things like that the ads can't be skipped, or that the sports are blacked out in certain cities, or that East Coast programming doesn't get shown on the West Coast. There's a whole lot of things. Those are real requirements. Content, people say content is king. The content providers make that content available, and they lock it up with contracts. And we only have one content provider representative here, and John, I don't think you can speak for the NFL or NASCAR or some of the other content sources. So I'm not sure this committee is even able to address some of the obstacles that are created by the content rights. And yet many of the security and technical elements are there to propagate those content restrictions through the system. So I'm really at a loss about how to proceed.
Excellent comments, and I think it's a good segue into what direction the FCC is going to be providing.
John, this is Milo. Cable card exists today. Those content requirements exist today. Obviously, people are not in breach of those contracts because they support cable card. So I don't exactly see how this is such an insurmountable problem when the status quo already supports that configuration.
We shouldn't get into a debate, but I'll point out cable card only works on cable systems. So already that's a subset of the problem that the Stellar reauthorization has set for us.
No, I agree, but if you're asserting that, and I don't think the MPAA folks have asserted this, that you cannot support third-party boxes within the context of an open platform. We already have that existence case with cable card, and people are not being sued for breach of their programming agreements just because they support cable card. I mean, that's just a fact.
So I think there's, in John's outline, there's, in this sort of subsequent discussion, there seems to be a conflation of things that are subject to sort of the purview of 629, or at least as I read it, and other services like over-the-top internet services and sort of ancillary services that come from these MVPD service providers. And I think a reading of Section A in its entirety, is talking about video distribution systems and video programming systems. I think these secondary over-the-top services that were brought into this conversation are really probably beyond the scope of this. Hopefully we can have some clarity on that. And it's probably in large part what's sort of complicating this discussion, right? Because the big divergence between these is sort of the assertion that we should either take a sort of fundamental approach of replacing cable card and filling that void, or that we should take an overarching look at the industry as a whole and then apply some sort of grand regulation to it. And I think that that's sort of what we need to resolve in order to see how to go forward.
Time for a weird DBS comment. I don't think what you just meant to say was because VOD over cable is offered over a two-way system, they get to have their problem solved by what we're doing here. But because DBS uses over-the-top delivery for VOD, we don't.
No. So not only is that not what I intended to say, but I'm pretty sure that's not what I said. What I'm indicating is that, in the discussion of your outline, there was discussion of sort of, services on iPads, for instance, right? Right. And a service on an iPad, as per what I think was Milo's indication over the phone, is of course delivered on a secondary IP channel from that's not sort of your primary delivery channel right now, right? And you guys talked about the sort of I think Mark mentioned the moving box, right? The sort of like the moving target, right? I can say, fundamentally the idea, for instance, like the application coming downstream via the primary channel and being sideloaded onto an iPad without having Apple to speak to it, given the requirements of their app signing and application store, is probably a pretty long reach, right? And so that's not something that sort of fits their contractual obligations and their sort of constraints with their users already.
So one of the things that maybe we need some demos of what's actually out there. iPad video can be served over the top over a pure IP network for dish content. Mm-hmm. It also can be served directly from the Hopper set-top box fed from the DBS network in the home. So Milo's assertion we use IP is correct, but in that case we are actually serving the iPad, say, as a remote display in the home is the model, using an app as you know.
So all I'm asserting is that there's a vast chasm functionally between sort of your normal DBS distribution and possible sort of secondary application-based or IP distribution, right? I think that those are really very different and distinct delivery systems. Right?
And yes, they are distinct delivery systems, but they're all part of the Dish Network service if we include VOD as part of the Dish Network service. If we're not including VOD, this is why I thought...
And I think this is why I think have historically spent a great deal of time on sort of discussions of the definition of service, which is probably, to other comments, what we need to make it past this at some point, right? Because it's a very overloaded word. But I think if we look at it, let's imagine for a moment that cable card worked for DBS, right? That cable card actually worked for all of the delivery systems as they were 10 years ago, right? Then if we were to talk about that as sort of a working model for sort of cable card parity services, right? Or sort of previous service, right? Service model A, right? Then the other stuff would sort of be typically MVPD or vendor-specific add-on services, in which, in a number of cases, like our video delivery services or your sister companies, Sling delivery services, are sort of additional or sort of newer services, and only some of these organizations participate, I think, in delivering some of these types of services. If you were to put them into buckets, right? At Amazon, we aren't an MVPD. I honestly have no idea if that would ever happen, but we are we are obviously an over-the-top streaming service for video on demand, right? So we participate in one of those sort of categories of buckets. I think what was covered by cable card only satisfied really that first one, and somewhat incompletely, because it obviously didn't support DVB, right?
So, can I add? Are you arguing that OTT should be included then?
No. I'm saying that is sort of I think the argument that you guys were making. There was a conflation in Mark, in your comments, of sort of OTT services with sort of in-band on-network services, and I think that it's worth drawing the distinction, not drawing an inclusion.
But I think you're right, though. The thing we all have to wrestle with is, are they included or not? I mean, Sony's got a new service with their separate device contracting directly with content providers. Is that included? Apple's doing the same thing. Should that be included? Should their services be disaggregated as well, as Adam's talking about? Should your over-the-top service be that? Well, I think you're right. Those are the things we have to wrestle with.
No. I'm honestly, I think you're really trying to drag this into this discussion where it frankly has no place being, right? That fundamentally there is a clear technical distinction between a delivery mechanism that is, for instance, with cable, specific to a region, right? So that there's cable laid, or there's fiber laid, or there are birds in the air, right? These things are specific to providers, and as we indicated before, there are very few customer choices around those providers for delivering, for instance, History Channel, local channels, etc., right? Wrapped into an sort of in-band, like coax delivery mechanism, right? And that is a fundamentally distinct thing from OTT IP services that leverage a channel for delivery that is not connected to the fundamental MVPD service provider. Right?
I totally agree with you. They're totally different. One thing I do disagree with: there's four different competitors in all those markets.
Well,
Dish, Direct, either AT&T and Verizon, and probably and cable MVPD. So to say there's no competition there.
Hang on, I didn't say there's no competition, but there's limited competition. But it is.
There's only one way to buy History Channel, I think.
There are probably 9 ways to buy History Channel, but
exactly. But we're kind of running out of time here. I'm sorry, but we've got to accept comment from the public here, so perhaps we can continue this discussion. Certainly issues that we need to consider as we're forming the next working groups and providing any more guidance. So for now, I guess we'll take comments from the public. I think this side is probably the best side. Just come up to the microphone.
My name is Neil Goldberg. I'll keep the seat warm for Steve Efros as he approaches the mic. A couple things, and excuse my voice, I'm losing it, the voice anyway. On a couple things my evil twin Adam Goldberg, no relation, said, cousin. Number one, he said it's no surprise that his outline, which I really haven't seen, reflects what he was going to propose to the group, perhaps as its conclusion. But what he also said, and it's on the videotape, when he was describing Stellar, the legislation, he talked about the technology and the recommendations and blah, blah, blah. He didn't use the word downloadable security once. He totally left out the key word in the Stellar legislation, which is the DSTAC is supposed to report on downloadable security in furtherance of 629. And that seems to me the limits of what DSTAC is supposed to do. I mean, its name, Downloadable Security Technical Advisory Committee. And it seems to me that the FCC staff or whoever else makes these decisions has to make a decision sooner rather than later, to tell the group what the mission is. I fully agree with John Godfrey. So I don't know when that's going to be done, but certainly if we're going on to other working groups, someone has to make a decision whether this is going to be an all-vid committee, as it sounds like my cousin Adam Goldberg wants, or a strictly downloadable security committee, which is what the words of the statute mandated. Thank you.
To be clear, to my knowledge, Neil and I are not related.
I'm not related to either of them. Steve Effross from BBT. Neil just made one of the points that I wanted to make, which was that the characterization seems to always leave out downloadable security. And I would just recommend, as I have in the last two meetings, some form of Occam's razor here, because the simplest solution tends to be the best if it works. And the discussion, I think particularly at the end of today, has been really good. And that is, if you don't decide those core issues of whether you're really talking about OTT, whether you're really talking about business plans versus downloadable security technical solutions, the real solution for this committee would be to go back to the FCC and say, we don't have an answer to these questions because we don't know what the question is. And Milo made a suggestion early on that things could be clarified, that this could be much easier if we just talked about IP. You know, if we just talked about the fact that, well, if everybody has an IP device, then we can solve a lot of these problems. But they don't. And we are talking about cable, and we're talking about satellite, and we're talking about broadband. And as I think John Card said at the first meeting of this group, any transition you're talking about to full IP is at least a 10-year transition for some people. This group has to recognize that there are small systems all over this country that are not going to snap their fingers and 2 years from now suddenly be IP delivery. They're not. And as John said, for the DBS industry, it's not going to be IP delivery in the next 2 years or 4 years. I don't know whether it will be in 6 or 8 years. It could be. Or there's a totally different business that they get into by then, which they're moving into now, and that is IP. All of those have to be resolved before you can even know what you're talking about on the business plans, on the issues of GUIs and all of those other things, and the security of the content with regard to the conditions that are put on them by advertisers and so on. Or, Occam's razor time, you can talk about downloadable security and leave it at downloadable security. And I thought Joe was great picking up that card. There are technologies today that you could put into a USB port, a USB dongle, or an HDMI dongle that could handle downloadable security, be plugged into any device that you want to define, be it a television set or a set-top box or a laptop computer, with standards that would say, here's how you talk to it, and you could secure whatever the information was that you wanted to secure. And that includes television programs, it includes video on demand, it includes anything you want to talk about in terms of the entertainment industry that we're tending to focus on today. And that same device, that same USB dongle, could also secure medical records coming from the doctor. So if you're going to talk about downloadable security, which is what I thought this committee was designed to do, and find something that was cross-platform and was non-burdensome, those devices exist. Those concepts and technical capabilities exist today. And the first order of business, it seems to me, is to decide what you're going to decide, or what you're aiming at first. And if it truly is what the legislation said, which was downloadable security, then I would recommend that you look at some technologies that you haven't looked at yet. Thank you.
I'm Steve Dulac with DirecTV. DirecTV is not a member of DSTAC. We also don't use cable card. We do, though, have a rich record of working with consumer electronics companies and having direct connection of retail devices with the DirecTV service. One of them is in an area that a lot of people are doing. That's the idea of apps and supporting devices and PCs, laptops, mobile phones, all of those things. Another area which is rolled out through DirecTV more extensively than in any other example, so I think it's worth sharing with this group, is our direct connection to TVs that we're doing these days using the RView technology with our Genie boxes. There are several TV manufacturers on DSTAC that have implemented and have rolled out TVs using this technology. I think it would be helpful I think it would be helpful for this group to see what I'm talking about, what we have there. I'm also aware that this meeting room is capable of me bringing in a demo of exactly that technology. Since the last time it was shown in this room, the DirecTV setup, we've actually launched an Ultra HD 4K VOD service using exactly that industry standard technology. DirecTV does not have a set-top box that can decode 4K, but we launched a 4K service. How? Because we use an industry standard interface to a TV, TVs from Samsung currently, that decode 4K. Exactly the same picture quality, the best possible picture quality that could be delivered today. And I just think it might open some eyes. It might open up the group's discussion to see that, and would recommend not just a demo of DirecTV's capability, but I know that I can bring something to show to everybody. Satellite delivered 4K TV, using industry standard interface to a retail device. Kind of sounds like what we're trying to achieve here, and would be happy to do it at the next May meeting. Thank you.
Hello, Jim Williams of Media Strategies and Solutions, and I'm representing Verimatrix. And Verimatrix, by way of introduction, serves more than 100 operators in the U.S. in smaller telcos and cable companies, which serve roughly 1 million users. And Verimatrix applied to be a member of DSTAC, but was not. And I note again that the only pure play, well, not exactly pure play, but mostly pure play security company that's a member is Nagra. Notwithstanding that Milo's company has a security wing and other companies have security wings. I'll go ahead and say that before they chime in. Verimatrix has been in the business of solving the same type of problem that is laid before this committee. And it's done so for many of its customers. And thank you for certainly Working Group 2 invited us as experts, and we gave input to that process. But as this committee moves further, and provided that this committee does move further into the downloadable security problem and not into many of the other problems that we've been discussing here, I would ask you to take advantage, take more advantage of experts, because there's a dearth of that skill set in the current committee. Not denigrating the skills of the various parties, but there are actual companies that focus on this activity. And I'm pleased that the counsel for the FCC was describing the rules that you are placing the working groups under as being mostly focused on not violating the quorum. And so with a company like Verimatrix and having more involvement wherever you can of us, we will in no way impact your quorum problem. So I'd ask you to go ahead and please take advantage of the skills that we have in whatever way can be done. And I thank all the various members now for inviting us as experts in some of these activities. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Any other business we need to conclude? Then we're adjourned until May 13th. I thought you...
Cheryl, so what are the next steps between now and our next face-to-face?
So soon, hopefully this week, we'll provide a little bit more guidance on the next working groups, the next steps of what those tasks will be. I'll send out an email where ballot, basically, where everyone can pick on which working group they want to be. We'll have a full definition of what those working groups are, and folk can be on them.
You're going to talk about scope.
Yeah. We'll provide further guidance on, yeah.
Okay. Hopefully you're open to input on what we think those working groups should be or what we should tackle.
Sure, yeah. Feel free to give me an email. And, if, like Paula was talking about, if you'd like to share it with full committee, that's great. Email me. I'll share it with full committee. Of course, then it becomes a record, so it will be made public. But that's not a problem. Pretty easy to post on ECFS.
John was first.
Thank you, Adam. Now that we've received both working group reports, does the FCC hold the pen on any just minor editorial corrections to those working group reports? Or are they closed and locked even if they have mistakes in them?
If there's typos or anything like that, those can totally be fixed.
Technical updates, things like that.
Technical updates. Well, the working groups aren't closed, so to the extent that the working groups want to talk about some things, I think Alan actually sent around some things that he said I don't totally agree with.
Which didn't get in at the last minute.
That's fine, and definitely work with
send
Bob and
them
Joe
back to the working group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
We're not going to take any editorial pen though. Let me take that away.
Okay.
Logistics, May 13th times.
10 to 4.
Thank you.
I am confused. Is there anything wrong with my...